everybody, and welcome back to the Clearground Show. I'm your host, Dr. G, with a PhD. This is part 2 of our return episode, No More Monkey Business. We're going to focus solely in this section on just COVID, and a major theme that's going to run through, as you'll see, in one of my favorite and least favorite terms to say is, I told you so. Those of you that have been following this show since its beginnings on YouTube or before, or that have talked to me in person about these topics, some of what you're about to see was predicted, and you might not be as surprised. But even if it was predicted, and even if you're not surprised, the behavior and the justifications they used to effectively change our whole lives for the last 2 years, and what they're doing currently and kind of just forgetting about that, is just absolutely mind-blowing. And here on this show, we're not going to let them forget about it, and you guys shouldn't either. We're going to talk a lot about how we got to where we got to, solutions moving forward. Can the public health establishment be trusted? How can they regain their trust that they've lost? All that and much, much more in this episode. So sit back, grab some popcorn, and enjoy the show. So first things first, let's start with some pretty recent news. The CDC on August 11th changed their COVID-19 guidance, and it focused more on, surprise, surprise, individual decisions. I wonder where we've heard that before. Here's a short list that NPR put out of the bullet point big ticket item changes that the CDC made, and those are that those exposed to the virus are no longer required to quarantine. Unvaccinated people now have the same guidance as vaccinated people. Students can stay in class after being exposed to the virus, and it's no longer recommended to screen those without symptoms. Well, that is a direct punch straight to the gut. Sorry about hitting you guys with that first, but that's what we have to do. But let's not just take it from NPR's little screenshot. Let's actually go to the mMRW that the CDC released on August 11th and go through that, because it is even more infuriating than just those 4 bullet points. So here is the official mMRW. The title of it was Summary of Guidance for Minimizing the Impact of COVID-19 on Individual Persons, Communities, and Healthcare Systems. This came out August 11th of 2022. A lot of this is going to read like things that I was suggesting a long time ago. And what's worse is this was not the guidance from the CDC until last week. So as of August 11th, it's the official guidance. Before then, this was not the case. Let's get into it. Right out the gate, boom, individual risk for medically significant COVID-19 depends on what? On a person's risk for exposure to SARS-CoV-2 and their risk for developing severe illness if infected. So, that's good to mention. And hey, now it's medically significant COVID-19. So there's a risk for that. But it goes a little bit further. The risk for medically significant illness increases with what? With age, with disability status, and underlying medical conditions. Again, this is commonsensical things, but it wasn't being preached early on or for the vast majority of the last 2 years. Everyone was treated the exact same, which was a total mistake. So now they're coming out and saying, well, hey, there's actually degrees of risk for different people, and you can make your own risk assessments based on all these different categories. I mean, yeah, this is basic stuff, but again, August 11th, this came out. So now here we're at the last sentence of the opening paragraph, and it starts off strong and then totally tanks. Let's read it. Current priorities for preventing medically significant illness should focus on ensuring that persons, 1, understand their risk. Good. Boom. 2 thumbs up. 2, take steps to protect themselves and others through vaccines, therapeutics, and non-pharmaceutical interventions when needed. Critical when needed there. Very, very important words. 3, receiving testing and wearing masks if they've been exposed. Well, we've done multiple videos on masks, and that is, okay, 3 is out for me. And 4, receiving testing if they're symptomatic and isolate for more than 5 days if they're infected. So we're back to isolating for more than 5 days if you're infected and symptomatic. Quick point on the masking. This is how effective the masking has been and will continue to be. This was the President of the United States, August 16th. Good. It's good to remove the mask, then cough directly into your hand. Very good. But the fun doesn't stop there. Let's keep going through this article. So they have a section on pre-exposure prophylaxis, and they effectively say that Irrespective of your vaccination status, if you're immunocompromised, you're still at a very increased risk for ICU admission, hospitalization, and death, which, okay, that's pretty big just because the irrespective of the vaccine status is a totally different tune than they've been preaching. That being said, they do acknowledge that, in certain immunocompromised populations, the vaccine does show that it might mitigate certain effects, but it's very unclear, as just 6 months ago, they were super clear about it. But wait, there's more. They have an actual vaccine section, so we're going to read a little bit of that. Receipt of a primary series alone, in the absence of being up to date with vaccination through receipt of all recommended booster doses, provides minimal protection against infection and transmission. Being up to date with vaccination provides a transient period of increased protection against infection and transmission after the most recent dose, although protection can wane over time. Furthermore, it seems that emerging evidence suggests that vaccination before infection also, maybe provides some protection against post-COVID-19 conditions, and that vaccinations among persons with post-COVID-19 conditions may help reduce their symptoms. It may or may not. We don't know. But Dr. G, nobody said that if you were gonna get the vaccine, you wouldn't get COVID or you wouldn't get symptoms. Well, for those of you that say that, I have this compilation video.
We're not in a position where we think that any virus, including the Delta virus, which is much more transmissible and more deadly in terms of unvaccinated people, the various shots that people are getting now cover that. You're okay. You're not going to get COVID if you have these vaccinations.
Our data from the CDC today suggests, that vaccinated people do not carry the virus, don't get sick, and that it's not just in the clinical trials, but it's also in real-world data.
Now we know that the vaccines work well enough that the virus stops with every vaccinated person. A vaccinated person gets exposed to the virus does not infect them. The virus cannot then use that person to go anywhere else.
When people are vaccinated, they can feel safe that they are not going to get infected, whether they're outdoors or indoors. That's the bottom line of that, to get people to appreciate you get vaccinated and you're really quite safe from getting infected. There will always be breakthrough infections,
right?
But given the denominator of people who are vaccinated, that's a very, very rare event.
It was just some of the most influential people in American society and politics, including the president. That's all. Those are the only people that were saying that. A couple more things on the MMRW. So here in the medication section, they list antiviral medications, which we don't know that much about Paxlovid, but they included that and remdesivir. And interestingly enough, they included monoclonal antibodies. Do you guys remember in January when the Biden administration effectively politically targeted different states and withheld antibody treatment? The same treatment that the CDC right now is saying can be used to help treat COVID. And here's one of the last paragraphs of the document. And in the last sentence, they really just negate so much of what they just spent the entire time talking about. And I'll read it for you guys. In light of high population levels of anti-SARS-CoV-2 seroprevalence and to limit social and economic impacts, quarantine of exposed persons are no longer recommended regardless of vaccination status. If all this is a little confusing, don't worry, you're not alone. Even CNN, which is one of the biggest cheerleaders of the CDC, has effectively no idea what's going on.
You did a bad job explaining what the guidance is. It's not my fault. Trust me. Joining me now, CNN Chief Medical Correspondent Dr. Sanjay Gupta. He's also the author of Keeping Sharp, Build a Better Brain at Any Age, now available in paperback. Sanjay, you need like the best brain ever to understand what the CDC is saying here. And look, I give the CDC a lot of grace, in how they operate. They've had a really tough job over the last few years, but I can't understand what they're saying and why this morning. Can you explain it?
I'm going to save you guys some time and just say that no, he can't explain it. But remember, I leave all the sources here. Feel free to go and watch that video on your own time and watch his explanation. It's not very helpful. So another question that might be on your mind is, well, what's changed about COVID? Why all the new rules? Why drop all the old things we were doing on August 10th for this new guidance August 11th? Let's go through the numbers. So starting off with cases, and this is daily new confirmed COVID-19 cases per 1 million people, and it's a 7-day rolling average, so not cumulative. So last data here is August 11th, and we had 304.4 cases. That's a 7-day rolling average. But if you can see that little tail on the graph, it's been fluctuating on and off all summer. So if you go to May 20th, for example, a couple months ago, it was at 339.58. So really the COVID cases haven't changed significantly from May. Well, if it's not cases, maybe less people are dying. So let's take a look at deaths. So here we have daily new confirmed COVID-19 deaths per million people. And again, this is a 7-day rolling average. So on August 11th, it was at 1.40. If we go back to May 21st, it was 1.04. So the actual 7-day rolling average of deaths is higher. So if it's not cases and it's not deaths, maybe it's people in the ICU. So this next chart is you're going to see a lot of charts on the screen at once. The bottom left is going to show patients in the ICU. So we'll take, for example, August 12th, so last week. We had 13.02 patients, and that's the number of COVID-19 patients in intensive care units per million people. So again, August 12th, 13.02. May 20th, we had 6.83. So that's gone up as well. Well, maybe it's the number of people that just haven't gotten their first round double dose of the vaccines. Well, no. We are well above 60% in that category in the United States. And as you can see, the numbers are what the numbers are. So it seems like to me, effectively, the CDC has changed their policy to match public opinion, which, by the way, is the opposite of science. But the charts look the same. You have these hills, these spikes of COVID activity, and then these troughs, and nothing we've done seems to really impact it that significantly. All the people whose lives were impacted by this, and that's almost everybody, but especially those who lost their job, whose kids couldn't go to school, this all just changed on the drop of a hat, effectively based on public opinion. Effectively. What really is different? What is new that we didn't know 6 months ago, 4 months ago? Not a whole lot. So this is just very infuriating behavior, and it leads the public to not trust these public health officials with good reason based on these decisions. Not only these decisions, but what they spoke on with such authority. The vaccines will prevent you from getting infected. They'll prevent the transmission. Or look at what Dr. Birx admitted to on Fox.
As we get through this wave during the law, you should get vaccinated and boosted because we do believe it will protect you, particularly if you're over 70. I knew these vaccines were not going to protect against infection, and I think we overplayed the vaccines.
One of the architects of the response to COVID coming out right there just this year over the summer saying, we knew they weren't going to. We overplayed our hand a little bit. Sorry about that, guys. Sorry. Speaking of vaccines, now we're going to break down 3 papers surrounding vaccines that I think will really impact policy and are the kind of papers that you do for normal toxicity, for normal drug development, and things that we should have known before recommending this therapeutic drug to everybody and ruining people's lives over it. First up, we have a paper published in JAMA Network. It's the open section. It's a research letter, and it's from Iceland. And the title of the article is Rate of SARS-CoV-2 Reinfection During the Omicron Wave in Iceland. From the methods section, this was a population-based cohort study that monitored all persons previously infected with SARS-CoV-2 for reinfection during the Omicron wave in Iceland, which was defined from December 1st, 2021 to the end of the study period, February 13th, 2022. So here's a picture of the results. I'm just going to point out a few things. The median age was 34 for infection. The total number of people in the study was 11,536. 51% of the participants were male. Reinfection was observed in 11.5% of the study population. And of those who had received 1 dose or less of the vaccine, 11.7% were reinfected, compared with 10.9% who had received 2 or more doses. The most important result of the paper is right here. The probability of reinfection increased with time from the initial infection and was higher among persons who had received 2 or more doses compared with 1 dose or less of vaccine. Here's the table for the information if anybody wants to pause and read it. The authors were surprised by the results of their study, and they said that, there could be some things about the study that were limitations that might have led to these results. They go through those. I encourage you guys to read this paper. It's really short and it's free. Links are in the description, so please form your own opinions, but very interesting stuff. This next paper is in preprint. It is free to access. The link is in the description. The title of the article is Cardiovascular Effects of the Pfizer Vaccine in Adolescents. This comes out of Thailand. This is a very detailed paper, so I'm only going to take this one segment out of the methods, and you guys, I really encourage you to read the whole paper. This is the researchers' criteria for cardiac manifestations of a variety of things, and so you can go through and look at what they were looking for. So there were 314 total kids in the study, 202 of which were male. Out of the entire study, 7 males developed myocarditis in the study. The US had been reporting myocarditis in this age group at a 1 in 3,000 to 1 in 5,000 chance. In this paper, it was 3.5% chance. That's 7 out of 202 males. No females developed myocarditis in this study. That's 7 out of 202, that 3.5%. That's a couple of orders of magnitude more than what they were saying, just kind of in the ether back when they were trying to promote vaccination at every age level. For those of you interested, here's a kind of time-lapse picture that shows a patient with subacute myopericarditis at the time of diagnosis on the top 3, and then 5 months past the diagnosis, the bottom 3. We were discussing this multiple times throughout the show in the winch. If you guys remember, we did a VAERS episode. We talked a lot about kids and myocarditis being reported and anecdotally and just around the world. We talked about how countries like Sweden were just not letting kids get the vaccine due to myocarditis. So this was a well-known phenomenon. And here in the US, they promoted it. The absolute shame of it all, the most mind-boggling part, is that we had to wait for Thailand to do this study. How was it that in the last 2 years, the FDA or the CDC or any of these guys, how has no one done this study? This is basic stuff, and it wasn't done. For those of you on the social sphere, a good doctor to follow that really talks about a lot of this in detail is Dr. Vinay Prasad. I'll put his link in the description as well. This third paper goes well with a little bit of context, so I'm going to provide you guys with a little video that you might remember. It's a blast from the past from an episode back in January.
We're going to turn now to our Dr. Jen Ashton, who has some answers to some of your more pressing medical questions. We'll start with the first one, Dr. Jen. Is there a relationship between the vaccines and menstrual cycles? We've definitely talked about this.
We sure have, you guys, and this is really spreading like wildfire on social media with zero scientific or medical basis for this. Remember, in medicine, every time we talk about a study, a finding, what is the first thing we say? Big difference between association and causation. So yes, women can get the vaccine and then experience changes in their menstrual cycle. That does not mean that one causes the other. And in fact, if you look at the biology of how these vaccines work, there is zero hormonal interaction. So please, let's put that to rest.
Yes, this got a lot of attention because a school actually in Florida was telling teachers,
yeah,
they cited this as a reason for not being vaccinated.
Defies science. So
always good to repeat. Thank you, Doc. And another one.
And here's a little segment from January 15th about what I thought of this video. And I mean, what? It's just fertility, guys. It's just fertility. So look, the thing is, I'm not saying any of this to scare anyone. What I'm saying is the credibility is not there. They don't have credibility, okay? At the very least, they have the same credibility as many others that are opposing them because this science is changing so fast. It's just unthinkable to me that a drug with so little known about any of its adverse side effects, from fertility to heart issues to whatever, that they just rolled it out. That's just insane to me as a toxicologist. So if you guys don't remember, the reason this was being covered so much, even up to Good Morning America, it was being covered at that level, was because so many women were reporting that their periods felt a little off after having the vaccine. Of course, at the time, there was no human data on this. As that doctor on the Good Morning America show said, she said, just, whatever, it's safe. No data shows this. Those are all anecdotal. Well, one sign for cause of concern to the scientific community should have been this report from the European Medicines Agency on February 19th of 2021. There was this study, and I believe maybe one Japanese study, although I don't remember if that was concurrent at this time, but there was very limited information. And of that limited information on these vaccines, this rat study showed the different distribution sites for vaccine material in the rat. And of course, a majority went to the liver, 18%, which you would expect because the liver metabolizes a bunch of stuff. Then you would see some in the spleen, some in the adrenal glands, and then some in the ovaries. Now, relative to the liver, of course, it's a very, very small amount, but it's still quite a detectable amount. So much so that they listed it in the paper. This should be a big red flag for scientists to say, okay, well, let's investigate why it's sequestering in the ovary. Well, fast forward to July 5th, and we have this article publication, Investigating Trends in Those Who Experience Menstrual Bleeding Changes After SARS-CoV-2 Vaccination. This paper is very lengthy and very detailed, and I highly encourage you all to read it, just like the other two, especially with, in the same regards as the other two, the authority of which people spoke about the science when they had no idea about the science. With that out of the way, here's the most important finding in this study. In total, 42.1% of women reported heavier menstrual flow after vaccines. 14.3% reported not heavier, and 43.6% reported no change. Again, how were people saying that they knew what they didn't know? That lady in Good Morning America, the doctor, she said it is literally not the science. She said that, okay? There was no evidence. There was no papers back then. Here is, in this discussion, here it is. This is the very first characterization of post-vaccine menstrual bleeding changes. Why? Because they just did the study. It's just now coming out, right? The discussion continues by saying, however, the trends we observe support hypothesis development for additional prospective studies in hemostatic and inflammatory changes to the endometrium after an acute immune response. Good. I encourage that. We should be diving in and learning more. Also, wouldn't this have been great for people to make their own risk assessment on taking the vaccine? Wouldn't it have been nice to know that there are some changes that might happen that we don't know what all it means? I think so. Instead, we were called vaccine deniers and science deniers and shunned from the public square, silenced on social media, all for simply asking pertinent questions to making a good risk assessment decision. So we have to get through a lot to get to this last point, so I'm going to kind of truncate my response and maybe I'll get to it some other week. But let me give you one of the biggest reasons why I think the public health establishment really messed this one up. For starters, they used this endgame wartime terminology.
You don't want to do that? Now, this war against the COVID vaccine isn't just a war against science, it's a war against public health.
But as I have said from day one on this pandemic, I've been dealing with two wars, a war against COVID and a war against human stupidity.
I want to emphasize that COVID is an invisible enemy, and the war against it is indeed complex.
We are seeking to enlist you in a benevolent conspiracy, a team effort to persuade our unvaccinated family members, friends, neighbors, and work colleagues to join in the unfinished war against COVID.
In the new battlefield, hospital capacity is the top concern.
So those in media, the public health officials at the top, many medical professionals made COVID the war of medicine instead of a battle in medicine's overall war, I guess, against all disease. And by making COVID the war and not just a battle, they sacrificed everything to win it. And by sacrificing everything, they inevitably lost many really important things to medicine. They exhibited many characteristics that are good for leadership on the battlefield, but that aren't so good for leadership in medicine, right? So on a battlefield, if you're going to charge a hill and the enemy's up there, you want full courage. You want guys to not know that there's a doubt in your mind that you're going to win and you're going to run up that hill. That's very important in that scenario. In medicine, if it was just COVID and COVID was just the war that you were going to fight and win, maybe that's useful. But COVID's not the war. It's a battle. And what has been sacrificed is public trust. From masking to social distancing to vaccine efficacy to vaccine safety to transmission to deaths to cases. The tact was always taken by the public health officials and the medical community at large that we are 100% right. We're 100% taking this hill. Do not question us. Do not doubt us. If you question us, if you doubt us, you are cast out. And it's really unfortunate, but that's the way it is. I think vaccination rates across the board are going to go down. I think people aren't going to go to their doctors as often. And I think for sure people aren't going to listen to many things that public health officials have to say on any matter. And that's a real tragedy. Like I said on yesterday's show, there is going to be a disease that comes eventually that is going to be really ugly. And without people knowing where to get information, it's just going to be 10 times worse. So what can the leaders in the public health industry and the medical industry do? I think for starters, apologize. Even if they didn't mean to, even if they had the best intentions, the fact of the matter is people lost their livelihoods, kids lost years in school, lives were totally changed by these decisions, And you can't go back and change the past, but at least moving forward, people would know that these agencies and these medical communities are at least a little self-aware, recognizing that they've done wrong and trying to improve. That improvement could go a long way in eventually regaining some kind of trust. Definitely ran a little late today. I had a lot to go over. Thank you guys so much for listening. Have a great day. Please enjoy this video.